All right.
All right, I'll start it now and then let everyone in.
Hello, everyone. We'll take just a minute as folks trickle in. All right, I'm going to get going. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our 5th episode of Data Talks, a series of free 45-minute webinars about using local housing data to inform policy. My name's Claudia Aiken. I'm going to be your host today. I'm really excited to speak with you all about how cities can harness and collect local data to better understand housing quality. Also on this call is my colleague, Tony Bodolovic, who is graciously managing the logistics for us and will be teeing up your questions in the Q&A portion. I'm really delighted to welcome 2 guests today as well. Rico Razo, Chief of Home Repair and Neighborhood Services for the City of Detroit, and Isaac Robb, Vice President of Planning, Research, and Urban Projects at the Western Reserve Land Conservancy. And they're going to share with us their firsthand experience on this topic. So great to have you both. Next slide. I'm just going to start things off with a very brief introduction to the Housing Solutions Lab and this series. I'll spend just a few minutes talking about housing quality data, why it's so important, what some of the gaps are, and examples of how localities are already collecting and using these data on a local level. Then we'll have more of an informal conversation with Rico about his experience around housing conditions data in leading Detroit's home repair programs, and with Isaac about how the Land Conservancy is helping Cleveland and other places gather exceptionally rich housing conditions data through property inventories. And finally, we will have about 15 minutes for your questions. So please feel free to submit those via the Q&A function at any time during the session, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Next slide. If you're not familiar with the Housing Solutions Lab, we're based at the NYU Furman Center. Our mission is to help especially small and mid-sized cities plan, launch, and evaluate housing policies with the goal of advancing racial equity, health, and well-being. Next. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you'll tune in to our August session as well. That'll be on storytelling with local data. You can register for that and also see videos of all our past webinars, along with some recommended reading on our website. We'll be dropping the link for that in the chat shortly. Next slide. Now, if you're tuning into this webinar, chances are you already think that housing quality and conditions data are pretty important. On the most basic level, it's really hard to create a good housing strategy for your city if you don't know the condition of your housing stock. So just as an example, when I was working on Philadelphia's first ever housing plan, we wanted to create targets for how many housing units the city should help produce, preserve, and protect over the next 10 years. But how do you come up with a production target if you don't know how many units are falling out of your stock because they're unlivable? How do you come up with a preservation target if you don't know how many units need investment? So having good housing quality data is important for that. It's also important for enforcing standards and tenant protections. These data are also essential when you're designing assistance programs like home repair programs. How much assistance do you need? What kind? Where should it go? And finally, you can't really effectively measure the success of these kinds of interventions unless you have a good understanding of housing quality across your jurisdiction and also over time. Next. So unfortunately, though, housing conditions data aren't that easy to come by. We don't track them on a national level the way we do something like demographics, especially problems that are hard to see from the outside, things like black mold, whether someone has AC, those often fly under the policy radar. The decennial census and the ACS includes really only a handful of relevant data points. There's just a tiny share of units that are recorded as having incomplete kitchens or plumbing facilities, So that's not the best indicator of overall condition of the house. Overcrowding metrics could be helpful, but they're really more about the occupancy than the unit itself. And so often age of the structure is really the best proxy that's available through the ACS. But of course, you can have pretty well-preserved older homes as well. The American Housing Survey, on the other hand, is extremely detailed, but it doesn't get down to the level of the city, let alone the neighborhood, so isn't always the most useful for local policy decisions. Next. So there are a number of ways that local data can start to fill the gaps. In terms of administrative data, cities usually collect information as part of their code enforcement efforts already. So there are a few different ways this can happen. If inspections occur in response to citizen complaints, they might not be as useful because research shows that complaints tend to be pretty biased. They can be concentrated in certain neighborhoods. They might focus on the external structure rather than interior conditions. Renters might also underreport unsafe conditions because they fear landlord retaliation, right? But some cities have proactive inspection programs, and those can generate really useful data. Property tax assessment data, tax liens, land bank data, those could all also offer some useful information. You might be able to look at health indicators like asthma and blood lead levels that are often associated with poor housing conditions. And then some cities also deliberately collect housing conditions data as a way to inform their interventions through things like inventories and surveys. And so I want to turn now to some examples of these. All right, so first, here's a nice example of a city putting its code enforcement data to use. Chelsea, Massachusetts is a small, dense, and demographically diverse city near Boston that has a proactive inspection program. So researchers actually accessed data from about 1,600 proactively inspected units, and they used those data to develop a machine learning tool that can predict the probability that any given property in the city has unsafe conditions, especially ones that pose health risks. And this is really cool because not only does it tell, city officials all about property conditions around the city, but the Code Enforcement Division can actually harness this tool to increase the hit rate for their inspections. So basically increase the chances that when they do go out and inspect a unit, it's going to turn up unsafe conditions. Next. This is just a nice example of a kind of a traditional survey approach. Researchers at the University of Missouri worked closely with home repair providers in St. Louis to survey about 580 older adults about their repair needs. It was a mail-in survey. It got a roughly representative sample, and it generated learnings about the average cost of needed repairs, the most common issues, and patterns in the distribution of need. So who had the greatest need, essentially. And the findings motivated policy recommendations to expand funding for home repair, how to target and coordinate services, and how to prioritize certain repairs as well. This is a New York example, and it's kind of the gold star of housing conditions data, I would say. So every 3 years since 1965, actually, the US Census Bureau, on behalf of New York City, has conducted this survey. The 2023 sample actually included more than 15,000 units. That sample size was selected to estimate the rental vacancy rate with a margin of error of less than 3%. And that's because the city actually uses these results to determine their rent control policies, to inform that policy directly, which is really cool. But also, this survey tracks a lot of housing conditions. Since 1991, the survey has tracked 7 different problems, things like rodents, heating breakdowns, whether people are relying on space heaters, and they've added more questions since then as well about mold, about elevators, and the results are used by both policymakers and advocates. They've been really powerful, I would say, and in recent years, they've been used to strengthen tenant protections, petition for additional federal funding, and understand the unique needs of certain groups like immigrants. And finally, I'm not going to spend much time here because Isaac is definitely the expert. But this is just a wonderful example of a property inventory. Cleveland, like many Rust Belt cities, faces persistent issues with rundown properties, with vacancy. But in order to act, the city needed much more specific information on the location of these properties and their conditions. So in 2015, 2018, and I believe most recently in 2023, the city partnered with a local nonprofit, the Western Reserve Land Conservancy, to conduct this inventory. So a group of surveyors are sent out. My understanding is they have a mobile app that they use to grade properties on a scale from A to F. Based on that visual inspection that they do, they also look at local property data, utilities data, and so on. And they determine whether the structure is occupied and record lots of other information as well. And this has been a super powerful tool, I think, for the city to understand where to do demolitions, but also to inform programming and to track how successful that programming has been over time, right? So we'll hear a lot more about that in just a minute. Thank you so much. I'm just going to pause to remind folks to please be dropping your questions in the Q&A. I'm going to lead a little bit of a conversation now, but we are going to get to your questions very soon. All right. So as I mentioned at the top, national data sets like the census often don't include really good housing quality data, or they don't get down to the level of the city or the neighborhood. So I want to hear from you, Rico, about what kinds of challenges this might create in your work.
Claudia, thanks for having me, and good afternoon at this point to everybody who's on. It leaves not having that granular data leaves a lot of it on third party, nonprofits who are doing work on the ground. Our partners with the Detroit Land Bank Authority, who have done a lot of this work on the ground, and trying to all get access to Salesforce. As we know, Salesforce is a huge CRM that's used in the city to track housing conditions and properties. And the Detroit Land Bank Authority has really been the holder of a lot of those vacant properties and vacant lots throughout the city of Detroit. Just to give people a sense of the size of the city, we're 140 square miles. And there's roughly about 7 square miles of a downtown, midtown area. So a vast majority of the city of Detroit is residential. A lot of single family duplex, up to 4-unit houses in our city. And when and I'll give you guys just a little timeline. I've been with the administration since Mayor Mike Duggan took over in 2014. So I'm going in on my 11th year in the administration. And when we got into office, we were facing the challenge of trying to manage 36,000 vacant properties, houses, structures on land. And so how do you understand the condition of all of these houses and be able to determine whether or not you're going to demolish them, whether or not you can auction them to somebody that will fix them up? And so we did a lot of that, boots on the ground. It's talking about Rocket Community Fund and Quicken Loans with Isaac earlier. They've done a lot of work and supported a lot of initiatives in Cleveland, and it's the same here in the city of Detroit. We could not do this without the philanthropic community partnering with the city of Detroit and our Land Bank Authority to really get on the ground and take those pictures, upload it to Salesforce, have survey all of these properties to the point now that we're 11 years in the administration and we have a really good idea on where all the properties are. To date, we've received federal dollars, we've had bond dollars to demolish, I think, in excess of 25,000 vacant structures. I think at this point, we probably have a couple thousand left to go, and those will either be auctioned or demolished. But I think we're at a point now in the city where we don't have to focus on blight as much as we did, and we can really focus on home repair and restoring our neighborhoods like everybody, like all of our neighborhoods should be. And we're, our city is now taking things for granted like the suburban communities do, nice parks and amenities and houses that are fixed up. And eyesores that are gone and people buying side lots. So it's been really great to see over the last 11 years. But I will say a lot of that was done at the local level in terms of gathering all of that data that moved the needle on which way we were going.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about that, kind of the range of local data sources that you use?
Yeah, so one of the early players I would say in data is Data Driven Detroit. So they're a nonprofit agency. They mostly work with nonprofits. And so if you were to go to their website, you could filter all types of housing data, income data. And, we leaned on some of that back in, I would say, the mid 2000s. The Detroit Future City put together like what they thought a master plan would look like for the city in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think it looks a lot different than what that was back then. But, we looked at a lot of different third party planning studies and try to gather what we think would work and what we think isn't going to work. And for a while, our planning and development department here in the city of Detroit was, non-existent. They didn't play a huge role in planning neighborhoods and looking at strategic neighborhood fund areas where we brought philanthropic partners in to invest in money on major corridors and try to expand out from there. But now we have a lot of that, and through different planning studies, we're able to target because with 140 square miles, you can't just try to tackle everything at once. It has to be a pilot, and then you branch out from there. So we started a strategic neighborhood fund area to focus on 3 corridors in the city, and then that expanded to 10. And I think we're in a third iteration of that to 12 neighborhoods where we focused on corridors, spurred commercial development and growth, which led to housing values rising in the neighborhood, demolition, home repair. And you go from, neighborhoods where you could buy a house 10 years ago for $40,000 to now seeing values $250,000, $300,000 in those neighborhoods. So that, I don't know if I specifically answer your question, but it's been a mix of a lot of different partners that have been in this fight with the city.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. And yeah, I guess I'd also love to know just what you're thinking in terms of the future. What direction would you like to see Detroit go in terms of gathering more data or different types of data to think about housing conditions?
So this conversation is actually happening at a really good time for the city. As I mentioned earlier, we've gotten past or getting close to getting past the blighted house issue. And we had an infusion of a lot of American Rescue Plan dollars into the city to the tune of $800 million, which has really helped, especially on the home repair front. So now, after demolitions have taken place, people are buying their side lots for $100 and expanding their lot. Home repair is the number one topic of discussion for residents. Any city council meeting you go to, any community meeting you go to, people are talking about what can we do in terms of home repair. So we've launched a few really good programs the last couple of years, one being a roof replacement program. So 2,000 roofs are currently being replaced right now. And this year alone, we'll be replacing 1,100 roofs throughout the city of Detroit through American Rescue Plan dollars. We received $35 million there, and then we had an additional number of dollars through our Michigan housing department. So that is a wildly popular program. If you don't have a good roof, the rest of the house, it doesn't matter what's going on. If you have a hole in your roof, I don't have to tell you guys that. Another big area of focus that we have studied through our building and safety department, and that ultimately led to a certificate of compliance for rental units so that landlords aren't being slumlords. We want to make sure that people who are living in houses are living in safe and sanitary conditions. And so we've gotten to the point where we're asking landlords to register with the city as a rental and then also achieve the certificate of compliance. One of the areas that has been tough with that is lead remediation. As you guys know, it costs a lot of money. And so a hurdle for a lot of the landlords is they just don't have the capital to go in and remediate lead. So what we've done on the city side is we've offered lead hazard reduction grant programs where we're going into houses specifically where there may be children under the age of 6 or somebody who is pregnant in the household and trying to remediate lead. And we've coupled other grants with that to address critical home repair. So if we go into a house and we test for lead, we have a lead inspection report. We tackle that, but we know there's a hole in the roof or there's plumbing that may be an issue. We're coupling other grant dollars to address those issues as well, so that the whole house is now in good shape. We're doing environmental mitigations. So as we look at infrastructure coming into the city of Detroit, many of you may or may not know we have a second international span, the Gordie Howe International Bridge that is going to Canada. And that community is impacted where the new bridge plaza is. And so we've looked at the effects using data, the effects of air pollution, diesel emissions from the freeway with increased truck traffic, and try to gauge, who is going to be impacted and how far out from the service drive are they going to be impacted. And so there was a health impact assessment done, which said if we can mitigate some of this 300 feet out from the service drive, we'd be in okay shape. But if we could even go to 500 feet, that would be better. We had enough funding to go 300 feet from the service drive, and we were able to do a few hundred environmental mitigations where we invested, $35,000 into houses for noise reducing windows, central air, HVAC, MERV 13 filters to improve indoor air quality. So it's those type of things that are pushing the type of home repair projects that we're working on throughout the city. And a lot of times it may not even be the data, it's just hearing from residents. You go to a couple community meetings, you start hearing the same things, and that kind of determines the route that you want to take for addressing it.
Well, us researchers like to call that qualitative data. That's awesome. Yeah, and I want to especially highlight what you said about the rental certificate of compliance. That's a really important data source, right, that a lot of cities don't have about rental conditions. We've actually done an episode on rental registries, so I encourage folks to check that out as well on our website. And Isaac, turning to you, I'm hoping you can tell us now a little bit more about the property inventory, maybe starting with how it came about. What was kind of the motivation for it?
Yeah, happy to, Claudia. Similar to Rico's situation, we always in Cleveland sort of say that we're kind of Detroit Junior. And so everything in Detroit is bigger, for better or for worse. And so similar to Detroit, we really were facing a lot of disinvestment in the wake of the foreclosure crisis, especially in the city of Cleveland. And so as we were all trying to come together, whether it be county land banks, local governments, to try and get funding to deal with these properties, a lot of the elected officials would always say, well, how big is this problem? You say it's a lot, but that's not a number, right? And so it really came about trying to get that local data to create a bigger picture on a statewide and even a national level, working with partners in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and others to get the hardest hit fund legislation passed and that funding made available. And so we like to tell the story too. There's always a difference between sort of the head and the heart with data. You would ask a council person or a mayor, they go, oh, that street is in really bad condition. It's like, well, what does that mean? And if you actually go and take parcel by parcel condition data, you can say, well, yes, there are, a handful of distressed properties there. There are, 6 vacant structures, but the vast majority are still occupied and maybe could just use a roof repair or, paint on the exterior siding of the house in order to really stabilize that neighborhood. So it was really born out of a need to address the foreclosure crisis, but it has evolved to address certain things like Rico was mentioning, lead safe. There's a big initiative in Cleveland on that. Our residents first legislation to be passed to get vacant structures to be registered, to have a local contact and a representative for out-of-state investors. So it's really evolved over time as housing conditions and housing markets have changed in cities.
That's so cool. Yeah. And I got into this a tiny bit, but Anything you can tell us about how it works, how it actually functions, and what kind of resources need to go into an effort like that?
Yeah, so it really varies depending obviously on the size. Cleveland is the largest city that we've worked in. So Rico, you said Detroit's 144 square miles. Cleveland's about 82 square miles, so significantly smaller, but that's still, in our most recent survey, 163,820 individual parcels that we have records for. So you can really, depending on who your partners are, collect this data in a myriad of ways. We are big believers in having people be in the public right-of-way on sidewalks, working in teams of two. We think, this could be something that you had a crew of interns looking at a computer and looking at it, but this is really a community development exercise, and it's important to match that qualitative data that you get from resident interactions and talking with people with the quantitative data that you can get from the sidewalk, taking photos and answering a series of questions. So we work in teams of two. We do have iPads, as they've gotten smaller. We used to have sort of the dog shield, first gen iPads. Luckily, that's gotten smaller. We work with a tool actually based company out of Detroit, Loveland Technologies, their Regrid tool on the data collection from a software standpoint. And then we work in teams. We've had as many as 25 to 30 people at a time for Cleveland, or the city of Lorain is about 30,000 parcels. And that was a team of 2 people. If you only have 2 people walking the entire city, that took about 7 months to do. In the city of Cleveland, it's really a factor of how many people you have working. On a good day, depending on weather, we think you can collect around 125 records for parcels per surveyor per day.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Really concrete. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us a little bit more about how the inventory has informed policy, or how you guys kind of work with cities and counties to translate the data into policy?
Yeah, so you referenced, I'll use Cleveland sort of as the first example, and then maybe talk about some of those smaller mid-sized cities. But
Yeah.
between the 2015 and 2018 inventories in Cleveland, we really focused, and I can speak for sort of our organization specifically, on 3 of the Southeast neighborhoods that were dealing with the highest levels of disinvestment and distress. And of those 12,000 roughly parcels, there were 1,100 parcels that we identified through this inventory that needed further follow-up. And so again, this work is all about endurance. So we're working there for close to 9 years. We would meet with city officials on a monthly basis and track the progress. Was that owner occupied? Was that person a senior? Were they eligible for a homestead tax exemption? If it was an out-of-state landlord, were they on the rental registry? If not, what type of stick could be used to get them on the registry? If it was maybe an up-down double where their owner was upstairs and a renter was downstairs, could there be some sort of home rehabilitation loan granted there? Obviously, when interest rates were in a different spot, that was one approach. Partnering with Habitat for Humanity to do affordable infill housing, working with compliant owners that were adjacent to a vacant lot for a side yard expansion. So in order for that neighborhood stabilization or revitalization, it was sort of all of the approaches at once, and it takes a lot of endurance and really targeted work. It's easy to say, well, here's the data, here you go, have fun with it. But you really have to work with local elected people like council members, the housing court, the county land bank, to all work together on the county land bank has a great deed and escrow program. So if people are looking to transition from a renter to an owner, what does the pipeline look like there? So that's where it gets really fun. Obviously, I work for a land conservation organization. We're really into tree planting as well. So we have information on tree canopy. If there's a big correlation with disinvestment and a lack of tree canopy. So on the tree lawn, if there was a missing tree, how could we help residents get trees for their private property, or have the public invest in trees in the public right of way? So that's kind of one approach. And then I could spend the whole rest of the time talking about the residents first legislation that the Building and Housing Department has been leading here, but there's a lot written about that. People can Google and learn more than listen to me talk about it.
That's great. Okay, one more question for you before I
Yeah.
pull Rico back in. Where do you guys go from here? What do you want to, you know, new innovations going forward or anything
Yeah,
around?
well, I'm really excited about a few things. Our organization works in a 29 county footprint in the northeastern section of Ohio. I would be really excited to do similar to what we've done in Cleveland and Lorain and a few of our inner ring suburb partners, is really have a consistent update for this data. So maybe, and I don't know what that right number is, it probably varies per community, but let's just say every 5 years, right? That we're going out, we're being able to track these changes over time. A lot of our housing in Northeast Ohio is very old. Cleveland, some of our inner ring suburbs, 90% of homes were built, before 1960, 1970. A lot of our property tax base is, as Rico mentioned, single family homes. So I think it's really important not to be afraid of that accountability over time. And so I would love to work with municipalities throughout our service area to update that data in a more consistent and systematic way. The machine learning and the predictive aspects of it, I think, is really exciting. We aren't quite there yet, but as you have this longitudinal time series of data, I think that makes the predictive kind of analytical side that much easier. And so that's where I see the future of this program really going.
Yeah, so exciting. And so Rico, I'd love to just get your reaction to that. How do you think doing something like that in Detroit might inform your work, or what do you think the challenges could be?
Cleveland really is the little brother. I mean, we're doing a lot of that. But no, I mean, Isaac, when he was speaking, it sounded like a mirror image of a lot of the programs that we have done. I think I would add, Isaac was talking about HHF, Hardest Hit Fund. And so the city of Detroit received a number of those dollars early on for demolition. And what we did, instead of which sounds a little backwards because you think hardest hit, we're going to go into the neighborhoods that are hardest hit. What we did was identify throughout the city those neighborhoods that were pretty strong. Maybe you had a block of 50 houses and you had 5 vacant houses on that block. How could we utilize those dollars to address those 5 vacant houses, make sure there was no more vacancy on the block, but then also utilize nuisance abatement? So we had a NAP program through our Detroit Land Bank Authority where we had lawyers go after some of these out-of-town investors, out of the country investors that had dilapidated and vacant houses they weren't doing anything with, that we didn't really have the jurisdiction to demolish. And so a number of properties were actually pulled into the demolition pipeline through nuisance abatement, or they were put into the land bank inventory and then auctioned off so that they could be put into productive use. So I think we really focused on trying to not cater to out-of-town investors anymore. I mean, I think you've seen a number of documentaries on the city of Detroit where you had people in suburbs and other countries that were on a computer when the tax auction happened, and we had tens of thousands of properties that were going for sale for $1,000, $2,000, $100, and people would just sit on these properties, not do anything with them. So over the years, and Isaac touched on foreclosure prevention, that was a huge initiative that was funded by Rocket and Quicken Loans, where we had people going block by block, door to door. I was out there knocking doors, trying to make sure people knew their status. They were in danger of going into foreclosure, the programs we had to prevent foreclosure. Now there's been money put into paying off some taxes so people don't lose their properties. I think one of the biggest tasks we've had over the last several years is to keep people in their houses. We don't want to see people leave their houses. So we've done a myriad of all of that. And I think that's why you see, if you look at a map now that shows the data behind the increase in Black wealth in the city of Detroit, which is, I think, 3 billion at this point over the last 10 years, and the growth of Hispanic wealth in our city is just gone through the roof because a lot of that work. And we want to continue to create affordable housing. I don't work on multifamily housing. My area is all single family, but in the last 5 years, we've invested $1 billion into preserving and building multifamily affordable housing in the city. And we want to continue to do that. There's a big need. And it's exciting that we play a role in that through home repair and making sure people can stay in their house, not lose it.
That's so cool to hear. And I see that we have lots of questions in the chat for you guys. And folks who are on, keep putting your questions there. Even if we don't get to them on the webinar, we'll try to follow up with you after. So Tony, do you want to give us a question from the Q&A?
Yes, for sure. Thank
And
you,
real
Isaac.
quick, Tony,
Yeah.
is it okay if we have resources to just drop the links in the chat? Is that the best place?
I think so. We can also probably forward them to
Okay.
the attendees afterward.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, but thank you so much for this great conversation. I'm going to start us off with one of the questions that I saw repeated a few times was basically, how are these home quality data and programs being leveraged, or can they be leveraged to improve affordability and equity in neighborhoods? For example, can this data or these programs be used as like a stopgap against displacement for Black homeowners?
I'm going to throw that one to you, Rico. That sounds like a Rico question.
Yeah, I think every program that we are operating from the home repair side has some sort of income aspect to it. So the city of Detroit is roughly a little over 80% African American. I think we probably have a Hispanic population of about 9 or 10%. And we look at our lead hazard reduction programs, our senior emergency home repair, our roof replacement programs. There are two areas that we really target so that we can make sure people stay in their house and don't lose their homes. And it's our seniors over the age of 62 and those who are low to moderate income. So a lot of our federal funding that comes in has that requirement. So it's 80% area median income. We just launched a free will and estate planning program yesterday, where we're going to put on 12 workshops to try to target over 3,000 residents who don't, estate legacy planning is not something we talk about in our communities ever. I mean, I'm about to be 40 this year, and I am now just going through that process of putting together a will and trying to plan for my son through, trust and all that other stuff. But, those are the type of things that we have to put in place so we don't get to the point where we see a Detroit Future City report where you have over 5,000 houses in the city right now that are in danger of being lost by the family because the person living in those houses is not on the deed legally. And those 5,000 houses equate to $270 million in generational wealth that could be lost. So, the city is trying to make sure we address this on several different fronts. Again, low to moderate income, addressing our seniors who have been longstanding residents in the city of Detroit, so they're not displaced. And then also, will and estate planning. And then on the Gilbert Family Foundation side, they're working on probate and title issues. So where we're trying to do the preventative measure of making sure that people are living in their house legally and they're on the deed, those households that are in danger of foreclosure and not being on the deed legally and may need probate services, we have money going into that. I think there's about $1.5 million for a pilot program. So we're trying to address this from a variety of ways. We also have our homeowner property exemption program called HOPE. I think Isaac may have had a different acronym for it, but we've done a ton of outreach, door-to-door, mailers, phone calls, workshops, so that people who are low income and may not be able to afford taxes and can qualify for an exemption, whether it's a full tax exemption or a 50% exemption on their taxes, that they are qualifying for those. So they're not going into foreclosure or losing their property. So we have a number of ways that we're trying to keep people in their houses and not displaced as certain neighborhoods throughout the city are growing and property values are increasing. We want to make sure people can hang on to the property. And if they choose to sell and make money off their house because property values are increasing, God bless them, and that's their option to do. But for those that want to stay, we want to make sure that they can.
Yeah. Yeah, so important. Let's get another question, Tony.
Yeah, thank you for that, Rico. This one is geared a bit more toward Isaac, I'd say, but many people asked about the cost or the funding for the property survey. And I think what those questions are kind of getting at is how feasible is a tool like this for smaller localities who may not have the same access to funding, or I guess some of the other challenges you've had with getting that funding and managing it.
Yeah, obviously this is a function of probably the size and the expediency you want to get it done. We have done the city of Oberlin. We conducted a property inventory that's about 3,000 parcels. So again, the scale really is, there's no limit one way or another. We've found it to be a cost-effective measure as well to actually have local building and housing staff or planning staff be the ones to go out and survey. That's already a fixed cost that the city, has funding for. So if you do that over time, maybe it's 2 or 3 hours a day for 8 staff members, especially for a smaller municipality. We've had success in the city of South Euclid with that model. It's about 9,000 parcels. But the cost locally for the larger project, like the city of Cleveland, we used philanthropic dollars from Rocket, as Rico mentioned, the Cleveland Foundation, and then LISC has been a supporter. Local foundations are easy to provide, match funding for. A lot of municipalities have actually funded this themselves because it's part of their CDBG compliance. So they're able to access more funds by designating different areas using this type of property inventory data. So it's more of a HUD compliance tool. So really, it can be funded in a myriad of ways. The cost of the tablets, the data plans, the software, that's actually fairly nominal when you're thinking about the overall impact for an entire municipality.
Thanks, Isaac. We have another question here about some of the challenges of braiding multiple funding sources together for home repair. This requester says that it's been difficult for them in Trenton because a lot of residents qualify for multiple different programs. So kind of how to overcome that and make it a little bit easier on residents when they're applying for these home repair programs.
Yeah, I can take that. I think I referenced it earlier, but we have created Detroit Home Repair Task Force led by our previous chief of home repair. And it's currently in the process of being funded by the philanthropic community so that we can stay on to the long haul. I think one of the issues with home repair, I'm sure it happens at the smaller city levels, but in the city of Detroit, we have the city of Detroit funded home repair programs, and then we probably have over 40 different nonprofit home repair programs that are being funded by various sources. So one thing that we are setting out to do right now is trying to create a universal intake application so that it covers intake across the board, whether it's privately funded dollars, philanthropic, or federally funded dollars, and all those questions are on there. The worst thing that you can do for a resident is say, here, fill out this application, and we need your whole life. We need 30 documents to approve you for the program. And then that's just one program. And then they find out they can apply for another program. So they do that. Then they got to provide all the documents there. We want to limit a lot of that. We want to understand the output on how much home repair is being done. We want to know, where is a lot of the home repair being done? What are the number one home repairs that are being done and we should continue to do? So more to come on the home repair task force. We're in the early stages right now, but I think that'll really help all of us who are in this ecosystem so we can braid those home repair programs. For example, we're doing roof replacements in one of our programs, and a number of those people were already on weatherization lists, but they couldn't get weatherization done to their house because they had a hole in their roof. So we come in, we put a new roof on their house. Now they're weatherization ready, and we're talking with our Wayne Metro Action Agency, and we can now hopefully get to the point where we're sharing those lists, and we could say, okay, roof is done, on to you to get weatherization, and kind of couple all of our home repairs that we're doing and are funded for throughout the city of Detroit.
Well, I can't believe this, but I think we have about a minute left. So maybe time for one more question.
Yeah, definitely. This one's a bit more general, because all of you have been speaking about the interplay between federal and state and local, and this requester is wondering what state level actions, if any, should be done to help facilitate these data-driven initiatives.
That's such a great question. I'm going to jump in real quick. And one of the things that states can do is not preempt localities from doing things like requiring certificates of compliance for rentals or, doing rental registries. So first of all, states shouldn't get in the way, but I'd love to hear from you too, Rico and Isaac, about how states could support data-driven work around housing conditions.
Yeah, I'll go first on this one, Rico, and then maybe you can talk more on the implementation. But it kind of relates to that cost issue, especially if you might not have a robust GIS team in your municipality or in your county. Having some sort of state technical assistance, that maybe it's a grant program that could partner with, again, Ohio has a really robust Ohio Land Bank Association. So 69 of the 88 counties in Ohio have a county land bank. So if you have networks like that this program can be rolled out through, kind of, again, layering those partnerships, state, county, down to the local, and reduce those barriers. So maybe if it's a match from the state, a grant program that then could be partnered with a local municipality that provides the staff, and then a local foundation or a corporate partner wants to put in, and just making this, again, as easy to do as possible and not making folks intimidated or feeling like there are barriers to getting this data in local hands. Because again, I think it can be just as important for a smaller municipality or even a more rural county as it is in sort of these larger urban metro areas that I think get a lot of the attention.
Yeah, I would just say, I know it state by state or city by city, it might depend on the political climate as well. We're blessed here in the city of Detroit to have a great relationship with our governor, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and our mayor has a great relationship with Joe Biden. So I think, we've been fortunate to have that because we've received federal dollars and state dollars. But I did, earlier I referenced our Renew Detroit program, which was funded through American Rescue Plan dollars. And so that was $30 million. And the state of Michigan saw that and said, how can we grow that program to reach even more residents? And they kicked in another $15 million through our Michigan State Housing Development Authority. So that ended up becoming a $45 million program. And, we went from being able to do 1,500 roofs to 2,000 roofs. We're looking at, now that we're at a place where we've knocked down a bunch of houses, we have a lot of vacant land, we have neighborhood growth and property value increases. Our land bank authority is trying to, and a number of people are trying to figure out what is the most cost-effective way to do infill housing. I think right now we're probably averaging somewhere around $250 a square foot, which if you were to do apples to apples and try to do an infill house with what our 1926 housing stock is in the city, 3-bed, 1.5 bath, 1,500 square feet, you're looking at a $400,000 infill build. So our state housing department has also kicked in some dollars to do pilot programming for infill with our land bank authority. So I would say our state has been a great partner at looking at ways we can add to existing home repair programs, look at infill, which is hopefully the next big piece to what we're trying to do in our communities. But yeah, I don't have any complaints with the state. They've been a really good partner with the city. I think you're on mute, Claudia.
No, Claudia, you're muted.
Thank you, Tony. And thank you, Rico and Isaac, for being such great guests. Thanks to everyone for your questions. We're going to wrap it up here. We'll be posting this, a recording of this session on our website, so you can check that out along with some recommended reading. And we'll see everyone in August for our next episode. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.